Hello, it's Dr. D here, and it's November 2nd. I'm so excited. If you can't tell, I get so excited about this stuff. So we're beginning Brain Tips 2.0, and here we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the brain and making its connection with social emotional learning. And anything that I say in regards to students, remember, it also works for you. The brain is the brain. Doesn't care how old you are. Well, it kind of does. Okay, does care how old you are. But for the most part, the strategies that we use in the social emotional learning is going to be able to work for you just as much as it works for kids. So on Brain Tips 1.0, I spoke to you about the amygdala and told you how the amygdala is this switching station, right? So it decides based on the degree or the level of emotions or stresses that are coming through. It decides if it's going to let the information go up to the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain, which is our rational brains, where our long-term memories are stored, or if it's going to go click over, and if it's imminent danger or high stress, it's going to go down to the involuntary lower brain. But that's actually the second filter. There's a first filter before the amygdala, and that's called the Reticular Activating System, RAS, R-A-S. Now, the RAS is located at the base of the brainstem, right at the brainstem, and it is responsible for all the stimuli that enter the brain. It's the regulator, it's the gatekeeper. Now, what you might not know is that we get between 2 million and 14 million, because I've read quite a few articles over time, and it varied from 2 million to 14 million. So from 2 million to 14 million stimuli per second. That's huge. There's no way all of that could pass through, because it gets information from your nose, your ears, your eyes, your taste bud, your internal organs, your muscles, everything. It takes all of this stimuli, and it has to determine what passes through to keep, otherwise our brain could what you call short circuit. So between 2 million and 14 million bits of information, how much do you think passes through? 1%. That's it. Only 1% passes through. So you might be saying, well, Dr. D, how does it determine what 1% gets to pass through? And the answer to that question has everything to do with instruction and keeping the attention in the classroom, keeping our attention as adults, okay? And it has to deal with focus. It's what you're focused on, whether you realize it subconsciously or not. It has to do with focus, which explains why if you're looking for a car or you decide a car that you like, and all of a sudden you see it everywhere. There's the car, right? You see it everywhere. Or if you're in a crowded room and you hear your name, because that's a focus of yours. Why a mother will hear her kid cry before perhaps anyone else will. It is a focus that we have. That same focus happens in the classroom, or lack of. And if you ever wondered what was the big deal with an anticipatory set, the anticipatory set is to grab the kid's attention, to get their focus. That's why things like music and dynamic videos and dressing in costumes or playing music or any other kind of crazy way that you can introduce a topic in the classroom, why it grabs their attention. It's the novelty of it. Now, I want to give you this little bit of information. The reason that novelty is so very important is because in other mammals, it's a matter of life or death. Those animals have to be able to see a change in their environment so that they can react to it. If they don't pay attention to subtle changes, to novelty, they can die. They can get killed and eaten, right? So they have to be very aware of their environment and what things have changed. And I'm sure you've been there as well, where you've sat somewhere and you heard somebody whispering in the back. You start focusing on the whispering in the back. You might have, if the window's open, you might hear a bird chirp. And then you might say, oh, I wonder what kind of bird that is, right? So it grabbed your focus. But we as adults, we can control that. And we can come back in and focus on what's being said. Our brains are mature enough to be able to say, okay, I can't focus on that right now because I need to focus on something else. But kids don't have that. And I'm going to explain to you why. I sent out a questionnaire on social media where I asked people to please explain to me their definition of self-awareness. And I received phenomenal responses from over 100 people. And some of the responses, I'm going to read them for you, okay? So some of the responses for what is their definition of self-aware, it was learning to stop before I act or speak to think about my response. Understanding where you are and how it was influenced by where you've been. Being aware of attitudes and actions. Knowing my triggers and how to avoid the negative ones. And another one was the ability to identify areas to improve upon. Now, these are excellent responses as to what is self-awareness. But what I want to tell you is, it was really a trick question, because everyone who answered the question was above the age of 25. So you might be saying, what difference does the age make? Remember I told you a little while ago that age does make a difference? The reason being is because the executive function, the prefrontal cortex, doesn't fully mature to early to mid-20s, which means that rational thinking piece isn't fully matured. That is why it is important for us to realize that this executive function is not developed. They cannot have that much control over their actions. It's not developed. So for educators who say, it's not my job to raise this child. It might not be your job to raise the child, but it's your job to help the child know how to control those emotions and how they're supposed to act, because they don't know. It's not fully developed. A lot of the stresses that they get and the emotions that they get to go through the reticular activating system, who sends the threat of the dangers to the brain, goes through the second filter, which is the amygdala, and the amygdala then decides if it's going to go up to the prefrontal cortex or if it's going to go to the lower brain involuntary, right? Where you're going to have your fight, flight, or fright that I discussed in Brain Tips 1.0. So that's why it was a trick question, because we are mature enough and our prefrontal cortex has matured so that we can think that way. But folks, kids can't think that way. Their brains have not developed. Their prefrontal cortex has not developed where they can have this really great rational thinking. So that's why this reticular activating system is so important in instruction and in behavior. So as we continue through Brain Tips 2.0, we're going to learn how to use this information that the reticular activating system gets and how we can use it to help them become better emotionally controlled through things like mindfulness, which works. And there's a reason that mindfulness works. How we can change our instruction so that we can get the kids to focus in on what we're talking about. But that's going to be novelty. And there's things that you can do in your instruction to grab the kids' attention and maintain that attention. Because if kids lose the attention, it's not going to be learned. Period. It's not going to be learned because it's going to be this major stress for them. Remember, boredom is a stress. So it's going to be this major stress. The RAS is going to alert the brain, stress, there's a major stress coming. It's going to go to the second filter, which is the amygdala, who says, okay, wait a minute, that's way too much stress. I'm going down. Involuntary brain, fight or flight. Nothing gets up to the prefrontal cortex. Learning does not occur. And it's also a reason why you're going to have behavioral issues as well, because the kids are not going to be able to identify the triggers. But we can teach them to identify their triggers and how to handle their triggers by understanding the reticular activating system and its connection to social emotional learning, and how we can use this new knowledge to help improve our instruction, keep kids engaged, help them with behavior, which will improve our classroom management. So until next week, for the second episode, happy sciencing, Dr. D.